And welcome back. It's time for us to continue. Of course, let's continue our in-depth look at the hashtag End Bad Governance protests sweeping across Nigeria. And of course, what started as a peaceful call for change has unfortunately seen some isolated reports of violence, with reports of unrest in states like Kano, Kaduna, Yobe, and other parts of the country. Some bloodshed, some looting, and rage has left many Nigerians concerned about the safety and future of our nation.
Now, so to help us understand the complexities of these events and also the implications of the End Bad Governance movement, we're joined by Confidence MacHarry, Senior Analyst at SBM Intelligence. Confidence, thank you very much for coming through.
Thank you so much.
So,
completely jealous of your glasses, by the way.
We got some information from SBM only just yesterday regarding some very interesting happenings that happened during the End Bad Governance protests in other parts of the country. It was a graph, it was a sheet, and I think we're going to put that up very soon so that you can see these spots where we had cases of violence occur. Now, is there a way we could determine exactly why this or these occurred, and specifically why they occurred in these locations of the country? Mostly we see most of them actually in the north, but very little occurrence of the sort in Lagos and places like Abuja and where else now? So what gives?
All right, so the first thing you should understand is if you take a look at the spread of hunger and poverty in Nigeria, for every metric that SBM releases, the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics release, the World Bank, and the rest of them, you see most of the poverty being entrenched in the north. And as a result of that, you tend to find the desperation, and agitation a lot more concentrated in that part. And if you also look at the insecurity and things that usually affect cost of living and the likes of them, they are heavily concentrated in the north. That does not mean that the south is not really suffering from these things, but if you do a north-south comparison, you find these things much more endemic in the north. And there seems to be a little bit of a background to this. So for instance, if I remember correctly, the first incident of violence we had, or the most profound on Thursday, which was the first day of the protest, was in Kano, where there was some looting, and then they took the violence up to the government house, and the state governor was forced to declare curfew. There's this historical bent to it. Things really get bad whenever protests hit Kano, and this has been going on for at least the history of modern Nigeria. The first set of violent protests we had in what is now known as northern Nigeria was in Kano in 1953. So if you check every major protest in Nigeria's history from 1953 till date, there is a chance that when it gets to Kano, things become a dynamite. If you check the Metatsine riots, also in Kano, it was dominant. You check all of them down to the current era. You tend to find this thing where there seems to be a keg of dynamite there. And if you now bring it down to the south, you find that the police or whoever is in charge, security agencies that have been sent to quell the protests, are a lot more tame in the north compared to the south, because they understand the psychology behind it, that any bit of action that seems overboard or heavy-handed is going to ignite.
Can you explain that again? In the south here, it's a bit more tame, but in the north, they might not be as tame. So are you saying that that's what agitates?
Yes, that's what agitates. But in this particular context, it might not necessarily be as a result of heavy-handedness by security officials as much as how much the bad governance in quotes tends to hit people in the north compared to the south.
But this time it's different, because in the past, if you want to go back with history and regarding the history of protests, especially in Kano, there's always an opposition whom a certain group of people are fighting against, who are often perhaps present inside the same location. But in this case, I don't want to say an invisible, and I don't want to use the word enemy, but maybe as I go on, I'll look for the best word. But it's a protest that's supposed to help end the suffering that they're going through. So why did it turn out that it's like they turned against the system and are looting instead?
Yeah, when it comes to things like protests against hunger, protests against hardship, when people are desperate, there is only so much that you can do to kill them. You understand? So like I was trying to say earlier, that in the north, these things is a lot more desperate. And I think one of the reasons, I'm just suggesting that one of the reasons why we could see this kind of, the situation of things in Kano is because I think that they had that, should I say, political cover from the state governor who, as of the time when the protest started, was the only political figure across the country of such high repute or such standing, would say to say, okay, no problem, you can go ahead with the protest and we're going to back you. So they had that political cover, but one of the reasons why things went all right is because in the first place, you look at the crowd control mechanisms the Nigerian security forces have. Beyond the use of tear gas, they do not have any other capacity to repel protesters. I mean, since I've been monitoring protests in Nigeria, I think from the Occupy Nigeria protest in 2012 to date, I think the only other tool that the Nigerian police has had in their arsenal to curb protests or manage riots have been water cannons. Apart from that, tear gas is the most prominent. And if you look at how Kano is, for instance, I'm using Kano as an arrowhead now because it's the biggest city in the north. It's a big city. And its population only comes second to Lagos in terms of Nigeria's demographic spread. So the Nigerian police has not really shown capacity in managing these things. And apart from in the south, for instance, or in Abuja, where people want to protest, they go to Eagle Square to protest. In Abuja, in the south, for instance, in Lagos, if people want to protest, there's a tendency that they will either square off at Freedom Park in Ojota, or they meet at TBS on the island. But in Kano, it is not so. You don't have one particular place in Kano where you could point to say, this is where protests are going to gather and then we are going to manage them. They are dispersed. One of the reasons why I refer back to modern Nigeria in terms of Kano's history is something profound happened in 1966 pogroms when Kano rioters came out and then they were looking for Igbo people to kill after the January coup. The military government at the time, who instituted a state of emergency, could not handle it. How they were able to put down the protest is that the military governors then, I think it was Major Hassan Katsina, he called the then emir of Kano, Ado Bayero, he enlisted his help. So two of them rode across the city, street by street. So it was when these people saw the emir of Kano riding to them and then appealing to them, they got ashamed and then they put down their weapons and then they went home. But if you do a trace between then and now, from 1969, you see that that particular institution of traditional rulership or the monarchy system in Nigeria has been badly degraded. First of all, the bandits have bastardized the position because of how they abduct and kill so many of them. And then politically in Nigeria, it's so charged that people do not really respect them because of their, the way they support the current system and the likes of that. So right now in 2024, if you're calling the emir of Kano to come out and create protests, people are not going to listen to you because things are not as bad, or things were not as bad in 1966 as they were in 2024. So a lot of things have happened. So we do not really have a handle to it anymore. So if you have this kind of protest, especially where people are this hungry, things are likely to get hit and go really bad.
Especially when people are this hungry. I'm so glad you said that. We had Mr. Omoyele Sowore, who's one of the known faces of this protest, and he pointed fingers to the government and also the security agencies as them being responsible for the looting that we've seen, and also the number of agitation and cases that we've seen for intimidation by the security forces. Do you think that the intimidation and also the very heavy presence of security forces in the major cities across the nation where the protest is going has hampered on the success or the momentum of this protest?
Yeah, I think if you draw your mind back to what happened during the NSAS protest in 2020, there is actually a chance that what Sowore is saying is true, because there are videos on Twitter at the moment, still from 2020, where it showed that, I think in Abuja, where government vehicles, SUVs, were shown to transport government-allied thugs to disrupt the protest in Abuja. We also had similar things in Lagos. I'm not really sure about that. So it's the use of non-state actors, especially what they call thugs, hoodlums, and agberos and the likes, have been some kind of a way for the government to have a handle of the protest, even if it seems detrimental to public safety and national security. So in so many ways, what if I do think that that's the same thing that's happening now, I would say that the government is trying to use the same tactic so as to declare some sort of a state of emergency to get the people back inside their houses. But one thing I would always say is this. While you would see in a country like, say, Russia, where people come out for pro-Navalny protesters, for pro-Navalny protests, and then the state will arrest thousands of them and then house them in a particular place, process them, and then keep them in detention. Nigeria does not have that capacity.
And why is that? Because you also talked about, them not having proper riot gears as well. Years after into protesting, they're still using very heavy-handed approach to quell protesters or to de-escalate issues. Why is that? Why are we not, in spite of all the funding, and that is pretty much one of the responsibilities of the police force?
Yeah, the average psychological thinking of the Nigerian government is to respond to every crisis with the use of maximum force. So the Nigerian government always tries to project force when it doesn't really have the capacity to back it up after a few days or so. And one of the glaring shortfalls of the use of force is, for instance, we saw during lockdown where the government said there is a state of emergency, we are locking the country down, everybody stay in your house and everything. We saw that lockdown was only successful in very, very particular states like Lagos and some other urban areas. In large parts of the country, there was no lockdown. People were moving about freely. The Nigerian government has not improved this capacity to detain people, to process them and to facilitate their release using the justice system. So what it just does is, if you check many of the human rights abuses reports that indict the Nigerian police force, it tends to say that it shoots many of the protesters because the current capacity of the Nigerian prison service cannot handle that much amount. So what you simply have is this: if they have used riot gears like the one they have, the tear gas, water cannon is not working, the next thing they resort to is the use of live bullets, as we saw during NSAS protests and the rest of it. So I wouldn't really be shocked if these current protests go in the same manner. And it's classic Nigerian government response. So whatever they do not really seem to have a handle of through the use of negotiations, political bargaining and the rest, the next thing, even at the first instance, is to use force.
Let's talk about the address by the Chief of Defense Staff from yesterday, General Christopher Musa. He addressed the media and he told about the fact that the military is on standby. In a country where we've had many cases of uprisings or protests and stuff like that, with no real riot policing, however, the inclusion of the army instead of an instance like this, how good or bad can that get?
Yeah, it's definitely will get bad.
Why is it bad once it's the army?
Yeah, because...
And are the police doing okay as it is currently?
Well, in terms of what the police is doing, I would think that it depends on where they are. So, for instance, in parts of Lagos, Jota, for instance, I saw this video yesterday where they were supposed to move against the protesters, but they stopped short of doing that because the protesters spoke to them and the like, so they had to step back and everything.
So
but
they're reasonable?
They're reasonable.
Now, in
the
case of the army now, infusing the army inside of this kind of a situation, how good or bad is that?
The average soldier would tell you that I'm a trained killer. I am only trained to shoot, to kill, not to negotiate with you. This is not something that I'm saying hypothetically. This is something I've listened to senior army officers tell me personally, that when they were justifying the use of live bullets during NSAS to call the protests at Lekki, they told me personally that I am not there to negotiate. If I am called upon, my responsibility is to shoot. And it's problematic because in the first place, you do not really have to call the army to quell civil unrest, especially when the people who are carrying out the protests have been largely peaceful. So the use of the army to quell civil unrest is a function of a very, very dysfunctional state. And it is a very, very bad habit that Nigeria has been unable to break free from. The first time the army was introduced into civil unrest was during the TV riots of the early 1960s. The government of Tafawa Balewa introduced them, and then they quelled the protests within a year. And one of the profound things that happened was that one of the people who led the end to quell the protest, or the movement to quell the protest, Major Tim Onwategu, was one of the people who led the coup in January 1966. So it's not like as if the army is really, really happy doing this job, you understand? But at least at the top leadership echelon, this is something that they have been used to. So they have no problems doing it. But one of the things I need to state for emphasis is that the frequent use of the army to quell civil unrest, number one, it erases their invincibility, it reduces the respect that the people have for them, and then it's a bellwether to tell you that whatever democratic pretenses that Nigeria pretends to have as a state, it is actually just a smokescreen for something really, really bad.